Hello, I'm Sara Farolfi. Welcome to the Pod Lab, Experiments in Audience Growth, a mini-series by podcasting MA students at City St. George's University. In this episode, we'll be talking about how to grow an audience from scratch and, importantly, how to retain it. Joining me is Jacob Jarvis, the managing editor of Podmasters. Hi, Jacob.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us.
Not a problem at all.
So you have launched a podcast to the top of the charts with Podmasters, and I'm thinking of American Friction, The Bunker, Paper Cuts. How does it take to grow an audience from scratch?
So we were quite fortunate with our initial audience in that we gained it through our podcast Oh God What Now, which was originally called Romaniacs. And I think something that really energised the audience there was having a real cause behind what the podcast was for and why you would listen to it. So that was based around Brexit and going through the Brexit referendum and sort of pushing back against. We were on the losing side, but plenty of people were. So plenty of people wanted to listen along to that. So that really helped give the launch for Podmasters. And since that, a lot of the shows we've done have then launched out of using that existing audience we have as a base and then looking to kind of expand that. I almost see it as like a kind of Venn diagram where we're sort of building different circles out. But yeah, I suppose my advice on building an audience there would be that it's really important to give listeners a reason that they would stick with your show, which is kind of beyond just is it good or whether they enjoy it. There are millions of podcasts out there and a lot of them are very, very good. But to have someone actually go, I want to listen to this week on week or day on day, however regular it is, I think they need to feel a sort of sense of community and a reasoning that they want to be part of it. So our mindset regularly and has been is kind of we like to create almost like we call a gang, I suppose, around the show. It's the sort of parasocial relationship that people feel like they tune into you because they are getting something that they aren't getting anywhere else, and they feel like they're part of a little club which are discussing that. So that really helped us with building our the political podcast particularly, and I think part of that can be sort of highlighting in your strategy early on for a show when it comes to the audience of being sort of what you are for and what you're not for, and you can do that two ways. You can either really push your USP to be we are a podcast that does this and that's why you should listen to us, but you can also go along the lines of saying one thing with the Bunker, we regularly talk that we're in competition with, say, the Today programme every day. So our mindset is going, well, why would people come and listen to us instead of listening to that? So we're not sort of directly against it, but we're thinking in that way with our shows, and that's our way of audience strategy. I think regularly when people do podcasts, they think content first, and we very much do, but we also try and think of what is the purpose of that content and what will the listener be thinking. Not only they're getting from listening to it on an informative level, but what feeling they're getting that will keep them along with you.
So are you in touch with your listeners? Do you check in with them?
Yeah, so we have reasonably big social media profiles, but a big way we keep in touch with them is we have Patreon. So our shows, how we fund them is sort of split between adverts and also through direct support. And we have more conversations with the direct supporters because the platform just makes it easier to do so. So they'll get the shows ad-free, they get them early. But we also do things such as for American Friction, when we launched that, we've launched a community chat alongside that. So if you pay for a certain tier, you get to be in this chat where you can speak to other listeners of the show, you can speak directly with the presenters of the show. So we hear feedback through that. We regularly just get people emailing in, which can be really insightful. We'll ask for people to pitch questions to the show. That's one of the most successful things we find. Quite a lot of the podcasts will say, if you want a question answered, get in touch and we'll answer it. And I think people find that they really appreciate that, and it also lets you do directly what the point of your show should be, which is to serve your listeners. So if you ask them directly, they usually engage with that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So how much would you say of Podmasters' effort goes into audience strategy?
A large part for us, because of us having a relatively sizable audience, which is is split but also somewhat shared across the podcasts we have. Maintenance is a massive thing for us. So obviously we want to recruit new listeners where we can, but with a show like Oh God What Now, which has been going on for several years, I don't think we've hit the total the ceiling for the show, but we do see that the show will get bigger when there are bigger news events. So last year with the general election, it got bigger around that. With the US election, the show's sort of peak and trough as the news does. And so for us, a lot of our thinking on audience isn't always necessarily about who are the new people we're going to get. It's like, how can we keep the people that are listening to us happy, and how can we get them to hopefully try and listen to more of our shows. And I think what most people probably have 3 to 5 shows, say, in rotation that they listen to regularly. Our goal when we launch something new is saying, okay, well, can we hope that they already listen to one of our shows, and if they do listen to one of our shows, can we make a new show knock off one of their top 5? Can we become their 5th favourite show and be that they listen to? So retention is a big thing. And then on growing, we definitely do focus on that. A big thing about that is the guest booking side of it, we find really helps. The hard thing with podcast growth and seeing that is, unlike a lot of forms of traditional media, it's really hard to track where your podcast listeners are coming from. Because say with a news website, you can use cookies, you can track exactly where they are, how long they're reading for, who they are. You can make this sort of profile up, and there's software. When I came from a news background, and we were used to using Chartbeat, which is sort of a big chart that shows you everyone who's on one of your stories at any one time. You don't have that with podcasts because we distribute across multiple different platforms, and some of them share more information, some of them share less information. So you're in a little bit of a weird space in the podcasting realm of not always knowing exactly what is growing your audience. You just kind of have to we do tried and tested things that appear to grow the audience, but we don't know for certain a lot of the time. So on the strategy side of it, the guest booking we find useful. We find sort of cross promotion with other podcasts which are in a similar vein of ours tends to work, and that usually does seem to be something that helps both sides. So we'll do swaps with other podcast companies, and we don't find that detracts from ours, and it helps. But yeah, it's hard with the podcasting medium, I suppose, is because with it being not new but relatively new compared to other ones, the way you can track it is lower down and less prioritized than maybe it is across other forms of media where advertisers are more established, so they want more data. But yeah, it's a big thing we're constantly thinking about. But I'd say the big thing for us is, how do you keep the audience you have happy? How do you retain them? Because the listener who will come back every week is far more valuable to you on the whole than one who will listen once a week. And you could make one show have 1,000 more listeners, and that might be great. But if none of them come back the next week, that doesn't particularly help you.
Yeah, that's so true. What has been, if any, the impact of video in audience engagement?
Video has been a strange one, really, in that I think when you open social media now, I think a lot of people seem to think that podcasts are predominantly video, and YouTube has obviously tried to really push how it recruits video and stuff like that, and Spotify is using video now. But for us, in seeing a direct correlation between expanded listeners and video engagement, that has been somewhat lacking. We can't really see. Sometimes you can have a video go relatively viral, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the episode will do much more or much less. We found that a lot of the listeners do seem to appreciate the initial chance of seeing the presenters. So when we first put video out, you'll get a lot of people commenting saying, I never knew Jacob looked like that, and they will comment on that sort of thing. And there are some people who will make the switch, and we're seeing from Spotify certainly now, where you can get more statistics, that a lot more people are starting to watch the videos of the podcast we upload as video. But via social media, it's been hard, and part of that, I suppose, is the demise of Twitter, which was a big place for us and our sort of audience. That completely crumbling and barely anyone using it, / the algorithm being destroyed in the way it has made that harder to see. And then Blue Sky, which we moved over to, isn't quite so video friendly. So I'm sure there are a lot of podcasts where video engagement has been really useful, but I would also suggest to a lot of people to maybe not be taken in by seeing that if a show has tons and tons of people watching it on TikTok, that doesn't necessarily mean that the same amount or even a percentage of that amount are then going and listen to the whole podcast. And sometimes I think video can be slightly distracting from what the maybe more traditional podcast listener wants, which is something that is in their ears, where they can have their hands free and they can drive or make dinner or do whatever it is that they're doing at the time. So we've seen sort of mixed success really. Now that Spotify's prioritizing video, it's definitely been useful there, and they're pushing that onto their homepages, and to kind of be promoted on Spotify now. If you don't have video, that's much less likely. But Apple Podcasts doesn't have that sort of function in the search, so it's not there so much, and we still find that a bulk of our listeners, and probably more of them, are on Apple Podcasts as opposed to Spotify, which to me does suggest that still most podcast listeners want audio. That's the thing they care about the most.
You didn't mention YouTube. Is there a reason for that? Or
we've used YouTube, but again, we found sort of mixed success there. On YouTube, it's quite hard to get a foothold in the space, and again, perhaps it's our audience does tend to lean slightly older. It's generally sort of 45 plus, so maybe they're people who are less inclined to be on YouTube and watching a podcast. I must admit myself that I would not choose to watch a podcast in full. I want to listen to it, and normally I'm listening to podcasts because I'm at the gym or I'm driving somewhere or something like that. So, not practical places to watch it. But YouTube does seem very, very useful. But I suppose dragging it back to the audience engagement question, the thing we have found is that on our own social media, for example, we get quite good faith engagement from people who are listening to the shows. And unfortunately with YouTube, if you do get success, it seems to be attracting people who are not necessarily listeners to the show, or you get quite a lot of kind of rage bait almost interaction, it seems. So we will say, if we were to put up a video which was saying that we think Brexit is a bad thing, on Blue Sky we'd probably get people within our audience saying, we agree with you, that was an interesting point. On YouTube, it seems that it throws us into the algorithm of people who think the complete opposite. They're engaging in a more detrimental way. So that's another thing with the audience engagement side, and with social media, I think also with videos, is separating, are the people engaging with you actually listeners or not? And so how much to take that into account. I think obviously engaging with your audience is very important, but also making sure you're not swayed by platforms which could be, even if it is your audience, it's a relatively small amount of them, or it may be people who will probably never listen to your show and are only coming to it. And we know it's sort of human psychology is you're more likely to think of any time you've left a review for a shop or something like that. It's probably been because you've had a bad experience. You're more likely to comment on something if you think that was rubbish and I had a problem with it. You go through your day-to-day life having loads and loads of good experiences, and how often do you actually think, I was in Tesco today and I'm going to go and give them a really good review? You probably don't do that. But if you had a particularly bad review, you might think to act. And that does seem to be how a lot of YouTube engagement seems to come through, that it's more people who have found something that they've taken problem with as opposed to something they really want to engage with there. So video on the whole, I think, is an amazing opportunity for podcasts, but at the moment, the focus on how it's used, or maybe the focus on it as a measure of success for a podcast itself, I don't think is been interpreted quite as straightforwardly as it should.
Yeah. And finally, could you give us some maybe numbers to get a sense of Podmasters numbers in terms of what are the metrics that you're looking at mostly? Downloads, listener, because even here that would be quite a lot to say.
Of course. I mean, so for us, the big thing has been downloads. That's the kind of the best metric you can really get a firm grasp on, and that's something that using the outlets that let us put our shows out, we get. But then now Spotify does record streams for video if you're a video first podcast, and they're super important. And with that, what that has been showing to me, which I've been thinking about recently and was actually looking at today, a chart of, was looking at the metric of how many people listen through to the end. And looking at one of our shows today, it's probably around 50% of people get all the way through, which I think is pretty good for a show that's around about an hour or so long. But it's interesting to look at the chart and you can see where people drop out, and that is leading me to then think, well, what was it about the content at that point that made them drop out. Sometimes it is because there's an advert or something like that, and I suppose that feels like a natural break for people and they might click elsewhere. But if it's more anomalous than that, and it's actually at a point where people are mid talking and there seems to be a particular drop, then that to me is suggesting there's something to change. So on the show I was looking at today, there's quite a lot of people, the sort of bigger dropouts were to the beginning. Most people do sort of listen to a little bit and just check out straight away. But some were coinciding right towards the end of an introduction section. Now, an advert does come in there, so that is one point. But it also led me to thinking, is that introduction too long? Or are we doing something in that introduction that people maybe for whatever reason find off-putting? Is there a way we can reshape that? And then again, that loops you back to your audience engagement. So one of our shows, American Friction, we always start with a sort of light introduction. We want the show to have a fun feel. So we'll ask a sort of silly question between us, the co-host in America, so we don't really get to spend much time with her, so we sort of catch up using that. And I'm seeing that some people do drop out around that point, which makes me think maybe some people who are less engaged with the show, they just come to it, they just want the American politics stuff, they want us to get straight into the meat of it. But then looking at the engagement from the people who back us on Patreon, they always remark on enjoying our chemistry and liking having fun with us. And so that pulls you into thinking, well, which audience do I need to care about the most? And I lean to caring more about the people who are, if someone's directly giving you money, that shows they really care about the show. And that leads me to think that they are definitively most valuable listeners, but even the ones who aren't but are more aligned to them, your more supportive listeners, probably enjoy that. So if you're hearing that sort of feedback, so that's where there's the interesting point between looking at the statistical and the anecdotal, because there's part of me that could jump and say, okay, let's just make the intro 2 minutes long and it'll be right to the point, it'll get that, let's rip that out. But then I think that people who enjoy the show and enjoy the humour of it would go, well, what's going on? This show doesn't feel like the show I liked anymore. And so there's just that constant, that push and pull between how do we make sure that new listeners feel like they're engaged to this, and how do we make sure that the old listeners want to stick with it? But then that kind of, again, brings me back to, with the audience engagement, is that juggling of making sure your listeners who stick around will stick around. And so sometimes that is caring more about a smaller, more dedicated number as opposed to the wide number, because, as I say, 1,000 listeners who listen to you every week is far better than having 1,000 listeners who then never come back to your show again.
Yeah. On the American Friction, if I can say, I'm on the side of the Patreon subscribers.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it needs a little bit of sort of lightheartedness there, but I think that's where, I say, the statistics are really important, but this is where looking at video, looking across the audio, looking at all them, obviously you have to keep all of that in mind, and the downloads particularly, that's where the money comes from for the most part. But you also have to have that conviction, and going back to that point where I said that you have to make your show either feel like it represents something or it feels like it goes against something that gives people that reason for listening. And that often can't be boiled down to statistics. You have to have that conviction in the product you're putting forward.
Great. Thanks so much, Jacob.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you very, very much.